Hello everyone, this is Ali MK Hindi and we're back for another video this week, continuing on our PhD thesis writing 101. So in the last couple of weeks, I went over the introduction, literature review, methods chapter, and today we're going to go over the results. Now, in my personal opinion, I think this is one of the most important chapters in your PhD thesis. Simply put, you cannot get away with writing a bad results chapter. At the very least, you'll be looking at major corrections if this section is poorly written, or this chapter. But without any further fear mongering, let's get to the good news is that there are some key questions that you can answer to make sure that you can have a good results section. So let's dive right into it. As an examiner, the first thing I'll be looking to know is what are the most relevant findings? Now, the PhD thesis is the work over a couple of years, and hopefully you would have collected a lot of data. And unlike a journal article where you're limited to 3,000, 5,000 words, you have the capacity to write. However, that does not mean you can just chuck everything in the results section. There's a certain balance you want to get right. So think aims and objectives. Which findings are most relevant or directly answer your aims and objectives? On the contrary, if they're not answering your aim and objectives at all, then they probably shouldn't be there or they shouldn't get that much attention. Interesting finding does not necessarily equal to a relevant finding, and a lot of people, including myself, are guilty of this sometimes. So you might have a few interesting findings for you personally, but they're not that relevant in terms of directly answering your research aims or aims and questions. So always have that in mind. An interesting finding to you doesn't necessarily mean that it's that relevant. Last but not least, when in doubt, see appendix. I always say this because a lot of people come to me and say, I'm worried. I want to make sure that the examiner can see everything. And that's true to some extent, but you don't want to overwhelm them or lose track of the most relevant findings by chucking everything in your thesis. So what you can do is if you're in doubt about whether something should be there or not, you can always put it in the appendix and signpost them in the thesis. So you can say for the full data set or for the full findings, see appendix 1, 2, or 3, and then you can put all the data there. What this does is it gives the reader or the examiner the flexibility. If they do want to see the full data, they can in the appendix, but at the same time, you're not forcing them to read it in the actual write-up itself. So once I made sure the most relevant findings, I'm asking myself, are the findings organized clearly and logically? Once again, a thesis is a compilation of years of work. So you want to make sure that the data is presented in a way which it flows logically and sequentially. So does the ordering of the results make sense in terms of how you ordered or structured your research questions and aims and objectives? And by the way, this doesn't always have to mimic the order that you actually did the PhD studies in real time. So that's the next thing that I want to know. Once I know that what are the most relevant findings, I want to make sure that they're organized clearly and logically. It's not just all these different findings throughout the year, just copy pasted and chucked onto a section. Last but not least, have they used the visual aids effectively? Now, what I mean by this is whenever you put a figure or table, ask yourself, what does this add to the text? The aim of a figure or table or whatever visual aid shouldn't be to mimic or replicate exactly what's on the text. So for me, the two common things is it can either summarize what's on the text, making it clear to the reader what the summary is, or the opposite. It might be that you've only highlighted in the text, for example, in a questionnaire, you've wrote a section about what the main findings are, and then you can signpost them to the table which has all the questions. So always think, what does this figure or table add to the text? And if the answer is nothing, then it probably shouldn't be there. So this, in my opinions, are three important questions that you want to be able to answer to make sure your results section is clear and descriptive. So to go back into simplify it, you want to get the balance right between how much findings do you include and how much do you emphasize on the relevant findings as opposed to the less relevant findings. You want to get the ordering correctly in terms of making sure that the structure and the narrative is clear and logical. And last but not least, you want to get the interplay between the written and the visual components of your findings. And the reason I say it's an interplay is that they should work together. It shouldn't be a repetition. So that to me is the three key questions. I hope you found this section insightful or this video insightful. If you did, like, comment, repost, and all the amazing stuff we do in LinkedIn. There is an announcement that I've dropped in the comment section. We are doing a 3-hour workshop for all the nuances and details around PhD thesis writing. If you're interested, check out the link below. Until next time, peace and love, everyone.